You're listening to Talking to Teens, where we speak with leading experts from a variety of disciplines about the art and science of parenting teenagers. I'm your host, Andy Earle, creator of the Teenage Personality Quiz. Head to talkingtoteens.com for a free PDF explaining how your teenager thinks. We are here today with Dr. Catherine Pearlman. She is the author of the fabulous book, Ignore It: How Selectively Looking the Other Way Can Decrease Behavioral Problems and Increase Parenting Satisfaction. She's appeared on the Today Show, Parenting, Men's Health, CNN, the Huffington Post, and we are so excited to have her on the show today to talk about how to get your teenagers to stop doing annoying things by ignoring it. I'm really interested to talk to Catherine about how you specifically can apply all of the fabulous advice in this book with teenagers. Catherine, thank you so much for coming on the show. I cannot wait. I think a great place to start usually is just like, how did this happen? You're founder of this family coach, so you kind of coach families and like how to get through like difficult issues that's happening in their family, and you have this book called Ignore It. This book, has like a little kid on the cover, but I just really found that a lot of the stuff you talk about in here seems so applicable for teenagers. So I'm fascinated by kind of how you got into this, where this family coach thing came from, and then where did the impetus for Ignore It arise?
So I've been working as a social worker for 25 years, and in the very beginning of my career, even before I had kids, I worked in a program that helped teenage moms, and I would make home visits and help them, through their parenting. And the funny thing is, I really knew only what I learned from books. I really knew very little about what the day-to-day life was with kids, but still I could see some of the problems that they were having, and I did my best to help them through it. Then, years later, I had my own kids. I saw all the people around me having kids, and I thought, a lot of parents could benefit from somebody coming in the home and offering them some advice, some tips that can really improve and make a big difference in the day-to-day experience of parenting. It's a hard job. It's a hard job on the best of days. And it's even harder with a kid who's tantruming or one who doesn't eat anything at the table or siblings that are always fighting. So if I could help parents alleviate some of those things, then parenting gets a whole lot easier. So I started the family coach, and I would go into people's homes. I would ask them what's the worst time of day, and I would visit then and then help them improve what was going on there. And after doing that enough times, you start to see patterns, right? There's really, 5 main reasons parents are calling me. And I would start to say the same thing over and over again. And one of the things I said to every parent, no matter what they called for, was ignore it. It didn't matter if it was a toddler or a teenager. I was saying ignore it all the time. And then suddenly after, 10 years of this, I started thinking, what? This is a book. This could help a lot of people in a very simple way improve behavior in the quickest amount of time. And you immediately feel better. So I just decided I was going to take everything I learned from my practice in all of those years, and I was going to put it into this book and help parents that way.
A lot of people are recommending that parents, negotiate with their teens and make the teens feel heard and make they feel like they have a voice. But you kind of point out that like negotiating is not always a good idea because it's parents never like win that negotiation. Like the only thing that's going to happen if a kid comes and negotiates with you is that they're going to get more than they had before, right? And so if you give in and you accept their negotiations, then now they've learned the lesson that so negotiating works. And every time I don't want to do something, I go and just say, hey, actually, Mom, this isn't working for me. And you'll just go along with it. I think there's a balance because, we want to teach our kids that you should speak up for yourself. And like in life, when life hands you lemons or whatever, you shouldn't just like quietly accept it. You should go try to negotiate for it. But at the same time, if you let them keep negotiating with you all the time, then they're just going to run all over you essentially, right? So I was curious what your kind of take on negotiation is and how you think, especially with teenagers, how you can kind of walk that line.
So parents really struggle with negotiation, and honestly, it's exhausting. And the thing is, I am a huge believer in talking with your kids, especially teenagers, and working through things with them. So I'm not going to just tell you what we're going to have for dinner. I might ask you, what are the things you like to eat? And I'll try and make more of that. Or, when would you like to do your homework? What's the best thing that works for you? I don't necessarily need to dictate that. Let's let the teenager tell me what works for them. That's great. The problem is negotiation, once you've already given a directive as a parent, you want that directive to stand. So clean up your room before dinner, or go to bed by this time period, or this is what we're having for dinner. You don't want to say that and say or it's time to turn the TV off by 10 o'clock and then have the kids say, how about 10:15? Or this is dinner. And they're like, well, can I have something else instead? Or you say, it's time for you to clean your room. And they say, well, can I just do it tomorrow? Every time you say something and then the child says, no, can I just do it at 10:15? And you're like,
what if I do this instead?
Well, how about,
yeah.
It goes back and forth and back and forth. And so it's exhausting for the parents. Sometimes you just want to say, here's how it's going to be, and that's how it's going to be. So I don't mind parents talking with their kids and making a decision about what's going to work best for the family. But once you say no, like it's time to put the cell phone away, or it's time to turn the TV off, or this is what's for dinner, then that's it. Because once you negotiate, you are encouraging the child to negotiate for everything forevermore.
That makes so much sense. And I think in order to do that, you have to not just like make the decision really quickly. Like you have to know that once you make the decision, you're going to want that decision to stand, and you're going to want to not negotiate anymore from that point forward. So I think if you're going to adopt that attitude, then like you say, it makes sense to almost negotiate up front a little bit, like get their input during the process while you're kind of like making whatever decision you're going to make. But then once you make it, stick to it.
Right. I mean, the thing is, behavior that has a reward is going to be repeated. So if teenagers negotiate with us and the reward is they get an extra dessert, they get more time, screen time, or they get to stay out later with friends because they nagged us, and then they get the reward, they're going to do it more often. So it's really important, but it is counterintuitive, and it really does take practice. So for me, I go to no really quickly with my kids. And maybe sometimes I should stop first, think about it. Do we have time for a show? Do we have dessert? Am I okay with it before I just say no? Because once I say no and then I say yes, after they, complain or beg or bargain or whatever, then I'm encouraging more of that behavior. So it does take practice to stop for a second. Let me think about the request, and then let me come to a decision. And parents can learn to say, you know what, give me 5 minutes and I'll get back to you about that.
Yeah,
or
let me think about that. In fact, let's table that decision until tomorrow, because I want to make sure I talk to your sister about it, and I want to make sure I talk to your dad about it and get a decision that works for everybody. But I'm really glad that you brought it up. Yeah.
And then the other thing is, it does take practice when you say, so let's say you say, I'm going to think about it, we'll talk about it, and you come to a decision that the teenager doesn't like. So inevitably there's going to be complaining, tantruming, yelling, cursing, button pushing, all this kind of stuff that you just have to handle. And that's what you ignore. Because if you respond to that, the teenager gets what they want. Even if they don't get to stay out later, they get attention and they get you angry. And sometimes that's very rewarding. It's like, if I can't get what I want and I'm angry, at least I can make you angry. So it really takes practice for the parent.
They're kind of punishing you.
Exactly. And it works. So,
yeah,
and then sometimes we lose our patience, and then the kid's like, great, that was effective. I didn't get what I wanted, but my behavior still got a reward. So it really takes practice for the parent to say, it's okay for the kid to be angry and to express it, and I'm just not going to respond. And once the parent does that a few times, the kids get it. Like, it's over. Like, you've already said no, you've turned your back, you're walking away. It doesn't matter how much I curse or yell at you, nothing's going to happen. So there's no benefit. I might as well not even bother.
And actually, you point out that you call it an extinction burst. Like sometimes it actually gets worse before it gets better. And so, I guess how do you know? How do you know if it's working or not? And how do you know if maybe you've just got like you're dealing with a situation that the ignore it is not going to work on, or you're dealing with a kid that's just super defiant and it's getting worse instead of better. How do you know whether it's something to be worried about or whether it's just an extinction burst?
Right. So the extinction burst is sometimes things get worse before they get better, because think about it. If you've had a teenager who for years has been negotiating and generally it's successful, they usually get a little something that they want. Even if 1 out of 20 times they get what they want, it's enough to be reinforcing. And now the rules have changed. So the kid doesn't really believe it. So what they're going to do is they're going to try and break the parent and try even harder, make the behavior even worse. And then they're like, wow, still nothing? I still don't get what I want? Let me make it even worse than that. And they try that and still nothing, then they give it up. And it usually doesn't take very long. But the parent has to stay consistent and continue to ignore it without, providing any feedback or positive reinforcement. So it can take time, and sometimes things do get worse. And so for parents, a lot of times when things get worse, that's when they give it up. They're like, this isn't working. But that is actually a sign that it is working. The kid is getting the message and they're frustrated. That makes perfect sense because it always worked before. So if
they're trying harder.
Exactly. They're trying harder. Just wait it out. Keep ignoring it. And also make sure you're ignoring only things in response to when you've said no or put down a requirement, when they're being annoying, and button pushing, battle of wills behavior. Make sure you're only ignoring that stuff and you're not really ignoring them when they're trying to have a conversation with you or something that's important, But generally it's this, they're ignoring the right stuff and it's getting worse because the kid is not accustomed to this. But keep going and it will pass.
How do you make sure that you're ignoring just the behavior and not the kid? You mean if they're doing something that's annoying, but then at the same time there's like they are trying to start a conversation with you about
right.
Something that happened at school today, or like how do you balance that so that they don't feel like they're not being seen, but that they do get the message that the behavior is not getting through?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I try and teach parents to have a high tolerance for what they claim disrespectful behavior is and for the package. The job of a teenager is to develop skills to become independent, and that happens over time in a kind of messy way a lot of times. There are mistakes and there are bumps in the road.
Not always a clean break.
No, yeah, exactly. Right. And that's good, actually. We want them to make mistakes while they're still in the safety of their parents and their home. And they can get some support and work through problems. If they have no issues or problems with parents, who are, really helicoptering and involved, then the kids go off to college, and believe me, it hits there and it doesn't go very well. Or they go into adulthood and they're really lost. So we want them to have this kind of up and down and some difficulties and make mistakes and forget homework or, fail a test or, get kicked off the team, whatever it is, make their mistakes now and work through it. So I try and teach parents to not look so much at the package that what's coming to you, not look so much about the tone of voice, but hear what's happening. Really try and listen to what's going on or where's this all coming from. So, for example, with my kid, I have a teenager, I have a 16-year-old. I can look at her and I can just ask her a simple question and I get just nastiness back. It's not about me. It's not about my question. It's about her stress level with school or her anxiety about a change that's about to happen or a game that's coming up or she's hungry, or she's tired. Right. You've got to kind of see the bigger picture sometimes. And for me, when I see that behavior, that's a sign for me to back up a little bit, give them a little bit more space. Or for other kids, it might be give them more attention. They're not getting enough. They're needing a little bit more. And that's where the re-engaging part happens. Ignore some of the obnoxious behavior, but get in there. Play a video game with your kid and try and talk it out. Ask the kid to go for a walk, with the dog. Get them in the kitchen to help you. Just try and engage in a positive way and give them space to talk in a more open way. If you say to your teenager, what's wrong? Why are you so cranky or what? You're not going to get anything. But if you're sitting down playing a game, or you're playing a video game, or you're walking, or you're in the car, it's just the best place for this to happen. And you're not face to face, and the kid is a little distracted, you're going to get to a little bit more of the underlying. So ignore some of the behavior, but not the kid. Get in there, re-engage, and find out what's going on.
So then how do we figure out like which behaviors fit into this kind of framework and which ones don't? Because, a lot of parenting books are like, oh, this will solve everything. You can use this on every possible thing your kid ever does. And nothing works on everything, right? So there's some things that like wouldn't be a good idea to ignore. And you kind of make some really cool distinctions. So how, as you're kind of looking at the behavior that your teenager is presenting with, how do you make that decision of like, is this a ignore it type behavior, or is this a behavior that I really actually need to address?
Right. So anything that happens immediately after we say no to a request, that we can ignore, right? That's just tantrum behavior. That we can ignore. Whining, complaining, negotiating, all that stuff that happens after we say no, that can be ignored. Anything that's annoying is best to ignore, because I've had kids and adults even tell me this. They used to do it to their siblings. My sister used to do it to me. The most reinforcing thing is to say, that's annoying. And then the kid's like, really? Kicking the back of your seat is annoying? Let me do it more often. It's just... Exactly. I mean, it happens with siblings all the time, one goes running to the parent to complain. You're like, haha, I got you angry. And then you got in trouble. So it's very reinforcing. So anything that's annoying, best to say nothing. Same thing with teenagers when they're cursing at you, they're being disrespectful, they're pushing your buttons. The only reason they're doing that is so that you can get angry, and then that will reinforce and reward their behaviors. So don't do anything about that. So the things that you can ignore are few but really important. So you can't ignore real pain. If your kid is crying because you said no to something and they're throwing a little tantrum, you can ignore that. But if your kid is really suffering through something, or is really in pain about something, or is sad, hurt, we're never going to ignore that. We got to get in and discuss that. We never ignore something where someone else is getting hurt, like a kid throwing toys at someone else, or, punching a sibling or something like that, or vandalism. I was once in a supermarket and a kid was throwing things off the shelves. You can't just like look the other way and ignore it and just keep going. That's someone else's property. You got to address that. So, anything like that, you've got to get involved. And then the last thing that's like the most important thing that we can't ignore is the good behavior. And what I have found being in people's homes, and thousands of homes, is that parents are so quick to adjust behavior and give feedback on negative behavior and try and do teaching moments and improve their kids all the time, that they're forgetting all of the good behavior. And if you don't reward the good behavior, it goes bye-bye. Right? Remember we said if there's a reward, it'll get repeated. So if it's no reward, it's not going to get repeated. And so we don't recognize the good things our kids do, and they stop doing it. And I try and tell people, like, imagine, you're at work and you worked really hard on this project and it took weeks and you're so proud of it and you handed it in and your boss said nothing. Like, no response whatsoever, no feedback. You'd be like, well, I'm going to try less hard next time. Like, nobody cares.
Yeah, right.
So
right. Why did I just work so hard on this thing if no one even noticed?
Right. And parents spend so much time on the negative stuff and improving and teaching moments that they spend so little time. I've even had parents like log in a day. I don't want you to fix anything. I don't want you to do anything. Just for a week, I want you to observe yourself and log when you say something to your kid about good behavior and when you're saying something about negative behavior. And it's like, the scale is like so far tipped. And it really does take practice, just like everything else. But, we got to thank our kids for doing the chores. We got to tell them great job for good behavior. We got to thank them for, helping us with the supermarket bags when we get home. If we don't, they're going to forget and they're not going to bother with it.
I think that's so true, and it's kind of the flip side of this whole, this book is based on conditioning, right? It's like what gets rewarded gets repeated, and it goes both ways. I think that's a great point. We are here with Dr. Catherine Pearlman talking about how to get your teenagers to stop doing annoying stuff by ignoring it. And we're not done yet. Here's a look at what's coming up in the second half of the show.
As soon as they're done with the behavior, we have to re-engage them. We can't just stay mad. We have to just breathe through the part where they're tantruming and complaining and negotiating and whining and pushing our buttons. But the second it stops, we just change the subject. So instead of saying, clean up your room, be specific. Laundry goes in the laundry basket, by Friday. And then the other thing I tell parents is, what's your end goal with this kid? Is your end goal for them to be the neatest, the smartest, the most successful?
To clean their room all the time for the rest of their life? Right.
Exactly. Or is your goal to have a long-lasting relationship with your kid, for them to be happy and to be able to support themselves? Like when you have little kids, you can parent them in a much more hands-on, I said kind of way. But with
command and control.
Exactly. And it's very uncomfortable for parents to let go of some of that control. I get that completely. I really liked the control of picking out my kids' clothes and their sheets and designing their room. Like, I like doing all of that stuff. And it's very hard for me to see their hair go in all kinds of directions and what they want to wear and all that stuff. I like to control that stuff. I'm thinking in my head, really? But I say nothing. Why? Because I want to preserve my relationship. That is the most important thing. I love my kids. I want to have a long relationship with them. And it is not going to benefit anybody for me to nitpick all of the little things that happen around the house. And as soon as you let that stuff go, it actually feels better. Like, parents report feeling like not only is their relationship better, they just feel more at ease. Natural consequences is the best thing that ever happened to parents, because you don't have to do the punishing. You don't have to be the nag. The child learns the lesson on their own, and that is the best kind of learning.
Want to hear the full interview? Sign up for a subscription today. You get unlimited access to all the interviews I've conducted. It's completely affordable, and your subscription helps support the work we do here at Talking to Teens. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.